Mixing with Mike mixing tip. In this tip, we're going to go over shaping room mics or room sounds for drums. And this is specific to working with acoustically recorded microphones in a live space with live drums. So let's start by basically listening to some drums here without the room track, and then we'll add in the room sound. So there's a bit of room that's already in here, mostly coming through in the overheads, and that's also adding a bit of snap into the snare drum, which is not uncommon. And then we have a room, and this is the room sound on its own, so it needs a lot of love here, but what we're going to do is we're going to try to shape this so that it kind of works with the rest of the acoustic drums. Now, the primary thing to consider when you're working with the room sounds is sort of to fill out and add depth to the existing acoustic drums. And it's really going to be more or less a supplement to the existing close sounds. So my approach with room mics, because typically when you get into starting to use them, one of the biggest problems you always face is the fact that the cymbals in particular create a lot of very dense, complex reflections that eat up a lot of space in the mix. So the idea is that we really want to shape the room sound so that it kind of fills out what we feel is missing from the natural drums, in particular the kick and the snare, because it's primarily the kick and the snare energy that we're looking for from the room to help add the groove and that sense of depth. So that's what we're going to focus on here. So what I want to start here first with is just to kind of go through this basically, and let's just kind of take a little analysis of what's going on here. All right, so we get a lot of hi-hat in here, and so one of the first things I may do, and I'm going to be very aggressive about this, is to kind of cut this open a little bit. You know, cut it back really far. So even though this is like all of that extra stuff that's up there is way too cutting and too hard. Now, the other thing I notice is there's a lot of mid-range energy, which is can be problematic in here. So I think I'm just going to start. This is going to be like in that. It's going to be, you know, primarily in this sort of boxy 500 to 700 area. So maybe I'll just kind of try to find myself somewhere in between here. And getting a little bit radical on this, but this is actually okay, you know, to start off with. The next thing I want to focus on, and I could take this out, and of course I'm going to make some adjustments here accordingly, which is to find the low center of the drums. So right there you can actually hear the tone of the drum, and this is really important and powerful, because now once I kind of got this, what I probably want to do is filter a little bit below it, and then if I want to add more width on this, I can do so. And this allows me to kind of fill out the low end content in the room. So now if I take this out, and we take this, so now we got a bit of the kick energy. Now I'm missing a bit of the snare energy, and this can come in kind of two places. One of the ways, and I'm going to cross bands here, which I don't normally like to do, is to try to find the low end of the snare here, and this is usually somewhere in the hundreds, and I'm going to start with a focused EQ. Might take this guy out here so it'll just kind of help me to see what I can find. And I don't really get that sense of low end in there from this, so I'm just going to kind of leave this and you know, do that there. What was kind of cool there, which may be helpful, is a little bit lower, like around, and that's where you can hear like all the splashy cymbal stuff. There was a frequency in here. And I'm not sure if that works well with this. I think it's going to take it a little bit too far out, so I'm going to kind of leave that alone there, zero this out, and then kind of sweep back up here. So now what I want to do is I want to try to find here an area where I can kind of boost the snare and get a little bit more of the snap out of the snare without being too harsh. And I might be able to do this on a shelf. And unfortunately what I'm getting there is a bit too much harshness. And so now this may on its own seem like, especially when you get to that section where the cymbals are really like very complex and dense, but I think you'll kind of see, because it's like rolling off a lot on the top end. But what you'll see here when we bring this back into the drums, and I'm going to continue to manipulate this with the rest of the drums mixed in, is that what we really want to do is kind of fill out what we're missing or what we need out of the close mics. So let's just see what we got. So we can hear the that low end kick energy, and I can boost it and narrow it. So you can really feel how that low end on the kick kind of pops through. And let's just see what we can make out with the snare. The snare's a lot more difficult because it sort of has a little bit of a nasty kind of thing to it. So I think it's just a little bit less of this. And that might allow us to loosen up a little bit here on the top end. And then we'll get back to that cymbal section here. And let's see if I can open up this on the top. Now you notice I did this rather than increase the frequency, so we're just softening the slope. So if we listen to what it does to the cymbals, right, it's not really making them more harsh or anything. There's still a little bit of a boxiness in there, so I may want to dip this a little bit more. So really what we're getting from this is not so much like this big room sound, because the actual room itself is not really, doesn't sound like it's that big, you know, like it's this big enormous room with this long time where you would get this real, you know, kind of crazy drum sound. But because the drum performance is so complex and it's so bright and so harsh, what we're really trying to do is just to get this sense of depth with the drums. So when you listen for the drums, you're not so much listening for the room sound in this particular case, but you're listening for the sense that the drums is now a bit deeper, a bit more three-dimensional. So listen to that. And it just gives this extra layer to the sound. And I can mix it up, be a bit more aggressive with it if I want, be more subtle with it, and it's not crushing the sound of the drum kit. And now if I go ahead and take this and I put a little compression, and kind of pump it along with the rest of the drums. An alternative to this might be actually to go here to an expansion kind of thing and do the opposite. So what I'm doing is expanding the drums, and you can see primarily the kick and the snare. And this actual release time is a musical value. Actually, I believe that's an eighth note. But you notice that the kick and the snare is what's driving this to move. So there's a little bit more pumping with the drums. And that's a little more expansion. Getting a little more makeup gain on this one, I think. I can also shape it a little bit. But it just gives you some options in terms of how you deal with the actual sound of the drums itself and how you play with it and how you manipulate it. So it's just a couple ways of working with it. Anyway, there's a little way, some techniques on shaping acoustic mics for a drum kit and getting them to work in your mix, in particular when there's lots of harshness or weird tones in the recording of the rooms. It's actually a much more difficult thing to do than what you'd think in terms of capturing a room really well with microphones, but that's the subject matter for a whole other mixing.